dormitories, or at the fraternity parties again, and we're walking back, and one of my friends reels back and throws a snowball at a guy driving by. Goes to the window, breaks on his face. He gets out of the car and comes running at me. I try to defuse the situation, but it will not diffuse. And finger in my forehead and pushing, and I'm trying to, it's not me, it's the guy ran away, calm down. We ended up fighting. School security comes, and then he presses charges with the police. So now I'm in court in Harrisonburg, Virginia, with an assault and battery charge in college and a second warning. Then the same guy who threw the snowball, 2 months later, he and I have an argument in the dorm. He grabs my bedding and drags into the shower. He and I have a fist fight, and his front tooth is lost.
It's just
Lost, vanished. I hit it out. He takes us to court. I said, I'm happy to pay for the dental damage, whatever. I go to court again, same judge. So then the first guy didn't like what the settlement was. He takes me back to court. So now I'm getting ready to get kicked out of school. I have dual assault and battery charges. And I go up to my dorm and I sit down and I'm like, oh my gosh, there is no chance that the future I had lined up for myself is going to take place. And I went back and revisited that question when the Christian students came to my room and sat down with me, and I said, not now. And I said, maybe now. And so really, at that moment, it kind of began to shift. So I had no idea what a Bible was doing there, but I pulled it up and did the sort of Bible roulette and opened it up, and the verse that landed on was really impactful for me at the time. And this journey began. And it was interesting because, I wanted to do the right thing from there on out. I'm set to serve you, God. But you kind of develop habits of the way you behave and the people you interact with and how you talk and so forth. How do you get from here to there? Well, God would push that button on the side, no science it. So God began to speak to me. And it began then, and it's come until now. And it comes in different ways. There's sometimes when it's a good idea, and it's smarter than you. And there's sometimes when it's somebody talking to you, and they say exactly the thing you just heard in your heart. And there's sometimes where it's almost audible. You're driving down the road, you're minding your own business, and he just talked. And there is no denying what just took place. And I stop and say, goodness gracious, that was beyond me, but it's so familiar. I know that voice. And it's like, he knows me. This is somebody who cares about me, but it's powerful. So the first one is I'm in the car with my mother and we're driving. So I'm sorry to back up. So he began to shift things right there and then. So I tried to get into this college, the stepping stone, and they said, no way. And after the second year, grades were a little bit better. My father calls up after this decision and says, apply to Vanderbilt. So I'm not getting into Vanderbilt. So I applied to Vanderbilt and I got in immediately. And so I was like, this is interesting. So we get in the car and we're driving there to get set up and heading down the road. I'm thinking, this was a mess, by the way. The legal thing was a mess. I had a probation officer. I had substance abuse counseling. I had hundreds of hours community service, which I did all medical so I could, ramp up my pre-med stuff. But it was a mess, right? So I'm just driving down the road saying, how on earth do I dig out of the mess? This is ridiculous. And as we're heading down the road, it's like his voice answered my questions really in a loud, powerful way. And he's funny because when I would get in trouble in college, when the fight would begin to break out, and usually it was like some sort of injustice, and I needed to stand up for myself, every once in a while somebody behind you, a friend or whatever, would say, I got your back. And when you heard that, you're like, this is good. We're going to be all right. Either it'll diffuse, or if it goes, at least I'm not by myself. And I loved it when that would happen. Well, that's what he said. I'm driving down the road, and this God voice inside of me says, how's this all going to work out? Hey, I got your back. And I was like, wow, that felt good. I don't know what that is, but that felt good. So, that's kind of what happened. So let me find my notes here. Yep, so no disciplinary records followed me. In fact, I have to tell the story every time I get another state medical license. They say, have you ever been convicted of anything? And I like to say no because this is 30-some years ago. I haven't punched anybody since, I swear. But I get to sit in front of a board in Massachusetts and explain, I really promise I've learned my lesson, I'll be good now. But anyhow, so we started back there, and my grades climbed. It was just, the Lord even told me to stop Ritalin. I want you to do this without it. And things just kept going the right direction. So my previously selected major of psychology became neuroscience, and I loved it. But then I said, what's familiar to me? I'm going to meet the guys I like, the ones that socialize, the ones that go to parties, and I was getting ready to go out to one. And I'm heading down the hallway, and I hear that voice, and it says, "What are you doing? I thought you made a commitment to me." And I was like, oh no. Like, who am I supposed to hang out with? I've seen the Christian groups. No. So I ended up getting out the yellow pages. Back before Google, we had yellow pages. And I finally said, you know what, God, you've got to give me some people that get it, because these guys don't get it. So I flipped open the yellow page and said, show me where to go. And I did the index finger on the church. And I headed there that morning. And I'm sitting there, and I said, nobody's here. And I got ready to go. And a woman next to me taps me on the shoulder and said, who are you? Where are you from? Let me introduce you to some guys. And so she brings me onto the front. And there was a couple guys who had probably a rougher history than mine that had just gotten saved the last couple of years. And I hit it off with these guys. And they were serious about their faith. We'd get together and we'd pray about stuff. And it was like, when we get together and pray, you're like, I felt like God was in the room, It was, things began to shift, Then your personality begins to shift. Then you stop acting, the way you used to before. But the direction was clear. God was like, nobody survives as a Christian by yourself. And that's a little bit of a theme here today. Nobody can be a Christian physician by themselves. It's hard. The culture will shift you if you don't shift it. So, all right, so as that's going on, I started feeling more convinced than ever that I was called to be a doctor. I could not get a good grade in that MCAT. It's not like I hadn't done well in tests before, but that MCAT, I couldn't do it. It was terrible. And I, having shifted out of that life to being a Christian, I was kind of ashamed of it. Like, that's not cool. And so I would hide that I was going to church, and it was sort of this weird double life. I would go, that's where I'd take my kids on what I call prayer drives, because that's what I used to do then. I was like, I'm not going to pray in front of people, and I need to go, no, I'm going to church. I'll get in the car, I can jam the music and head down the road, and that's my privacy, right? So that's how I would do that. So I'm studying for this test, and I am flunking these tests. I'm just not doing well. And so the night before it, I'm sitting down, I'm like, maybe I'm not called to this. Maybe medicine is my bag. And I said, God, ministry, I could do that. What do you want? And then I got up and went over and flipped on the TV, and there's a guy preaching at that moment, talking about a neurosurgeon who God was leading, giving him wisdom, showing him how to do these operations. And I was like, snapped the back off. I was like, sounds like you. So I sat back down, and I said, all right, are you going to give me the score I need in the test tomorrow morning? And I heard, are you going to stop being ashamed of me and be a bold Christian? And I was like, gosh, that is uncomfortable. And so I thought about it for a second. I was like, you know what? That would be so freeing. I guess I just don't care what people think anymore. So forget it. Yeah, I'm doing it. In fact, you can flunk me tomorrow morning. I don't care. I'm doing it. And then as he does with a little bit of comedy, I was going to give you the grade anyway. So I went the next day, and I got the best grade I got. Not a great grade. All the kids in my group get better grades than I do by a long shot, but it was good enough for me. So got the test done, did that, and then I'm finishing up school. I'm going to take a gap year. I'm like, what does a Christian doctor do? Medical missions, right? So I started reaching out to figure out who does medical missions, and we had a friend back home who knew a group that had just turned a huge airplane into a hospital, so Operation Blessing. And so they hired me, volunteered. I volunteered with them to pack the plane and go on these trips. And so we went to El Salvador and Panama and Kazakhstan and Philippines during this year. And I saw some amazing stuff. So it was cool just from a practical perspective, because I wasn't in medical school yet, but I could scrub into the operating room with these guys and see what was going on. They sent me to the prayer tent. And then I'd hang out with this South American pastor, and this guy had a lot of faith. And he'd pray for miracles for everybody. And we saw a few. We had a woman who had a stroke, and her hand was all contracted. He gets done praying, and her hand opens up. Like, that doesn't just happen. Like, that's what we're talking about in the conference the last 2 days, how to try to get a hand like that to open up. It's hard work. We had another woman who was entirely deaf, and her ears open while we're praying. And we're like, this is real. Like, I don't know how you can count on it, because God's very practical, but yet he jumps in and does stuff like that sometimes too. So I get to the end of that year, and I had applied to 5 medical schools, and I got into none. I was on the wait list at 2, and I still felt like this is going to work. And so I quit the job, and I went home, and I was just lying there in bed one night, just kind of thinking about, it's been a crazy year. Like, I have seen some amazing things. Life has changed dramatically. Like, thank you. Like, I feel more at peace than I've ever felt in my life. As I'm lying there, the voice speaks up again. Again, super calming, comfortable, but like undeniable. And he says, you're in school. And so I had a little sticky note there, and I wrote, okay, 2:30 a.m. on whatever date God told me I was in school, and I stuck it on the wall. Go to sleep. And the following morning, I wake up, I turn to the phone, and it rings. Upon looking at it, not before, it didn't wake me up. I looked at it, then it rang. I picked the phone up, and this is Eastern Virginia Medical School. Spot just opened up, and I know school's only like a week and a half away, but can you pack your bags and get down here? So yes. Of course, I immediately called the other one because that wasn't the reputation I wanted. I wanted to go to University of Virginia or something else. Say, you got me on the list. And so anyhow, that's where I ended up. And so another one for the students are always like, we got to get the label. We need the school. We need the Ivy League. We need the rest of it. If I hadn't gone there, that's where the expert in what I do was. That's where the wife was. That's where my buddy Rod was. There's so many things that I would not have had if I hadn't gone there. He knows where you need to go. So that's where I ended up. And I thought, why? They do primary care doctors. They do not do surgeons. They certainly don't do neurosurgeons. It had been about a decade since somebody got a neurosurgery from there. So I had like a fire lit under me that whole time. Like, I have got to produce. I did nothing but study. Rod studied with me. We just cranked around the clock. I never felt like a smart, gifted guy. I felt like if I don't put in 110%, it's not going to work out. And it was working out. The grades were coming along, but it was like an answer to prayer each time. And then the USMLE was our ticket to get in there, to get into residency. If I don't rock this thing, and boy, I studied day and night for that one too, but I walked out of it feeling like, not good. Like, I probably should start looking at another specialty. Same thing happened. I'm sitting at my desk doing work. As I'm doing the work, the voice spoke up and said, you did very well. Did the same thing, wrote it down, stuck it on there, went for a drive. Sometimes in faith you celebrate in advance. I'm just going to celebrate because I heard you. Like, I don't need evidence, I heard you. And so I did that, and then a couple weeks later, there's some rumbling about somebody got a 99th percentile, and it was mine. And so it really, I know Rod was like, you studied hard for that thing, but I've studied hard for plenty of things, and they didn't work out for me. That one was, wow. So I got to interview at all the neurosurgery programs across the country. And I had gone down and got a letter from somebody who's quite famous. I had no idea who he was, and so that helped me too. But suddenly I went from a guy who couldn't get into a reasonable college to a guy who had all kinds of neurosurgery programs opening the doors to me. And so the adventure continues. What's God got next? So Baylor is where I ended up in Houston. So I did my neurosurgery there. And then I wanted to pursue peripheral nerve surgery. So that came as, in my medical school, because there was no neurosurgery program, I found out late that you need research. I'm like, gosh, you need research? I've never done any research. We got no neurosurgeons. There was a plastic surgeon who did peripheral nerve surgery there. And I said, how is that not neurosurgery? So I went and did a project with her, and she kind of gave me this half-baked project, and it's like, it's on you to figure it out. And I read everything there was to know about it and just became fascinated with this topic. I never saw it again for the next 6 years, but I said, at the end of that time, maybe I should pursue this. And again, God sort of orchestrates these things. So I'm at Texas Children's Hospital, and they wanted a program there. So they're interviewing these people to do the brachial plexus program, and some guy sits down in front of me and says, if you want to do this stuff, you should send an email to Susan McKinnon at WashU. I send the woman an email. She has just received a very large donation for educating people. I was the first opportunity. She's never trained a neurosurgeon before because she's plastics. She said, yeah, let's do this. So come on down. So that's where that began. So then I ended up at Washington University. And so now the guy who can't get into reasonable schools is at a really top-notch one. So I'm at WashU. I do my plastic surgery there. I stay there doing neurosurgery in conjunction with her. And then again, it's time to go. So I moved on to University of California, San Diego, where Jeff Sheehan and I were partners down there. He is a superb neurophysiologist. And we really began to build a unique program. And it was fun, God was sort of showing us different ways to do things. How do we anticipate who's going to get better and who's not? The things that Jeff and I did together, I felt like we're really on the cutting edge. We go to these conferences and people are guessing when to operate. And he's given me, it is progressing. We can leave it alone. It's not. Let's operate. We're getting answers. Just felt like the Lord was guiding us. But in that time also, you think if God's guiding your hand in all this, that it's all going to be perfect, right? If you have an introduction like that, your whole career should be charmed. God's with you. You shouldn't have any complications. Not the case. And complications to me were absolutely devastating. Like, I want to be the hero. Like, I'm working for God. We're praying for patience. And so, we had some exciting times, but I had patients that I lost that I felt like shouldn't have lost. I had patients that had horrible complications that I felt like that never should have happened. And if you're with me, if you've guided me in this, you've called me to this, why would that be the case? I went through times of thinking, I got to get out of this. Like, I've hurt some folks and it's time to pack it up and get out. And so, prayer time sometimes is like a message in a bottle. My son was saying it's like email. You sit there and you have your prayer time and the answer kind of drifts in a few weeks later, circumstantial, okay, that's what he's saying. But if you draw near to God, he draws near to you, it promises. So in these times where you're in some emotional pain, you say, no, I'm not leaving till you meet me. And so we had this room in San Diego where I would sit down and I'd say, no, we're meeting. We're making eye contact, all right? And I would sit down there and I would do this thing where I'm going to make eye contact with Jesus. I'm going to sit down and imagine he's in front of me. And I'm going to grab him by the hands. I'm going to put my thumb in the nail print. And I'm going to look him in the eyes. And I'm going to think about a verse. So like, John, I'm the vine, you're the branches. He who abides in me and I in him, the same shall bring forth much fruit. So if I'm not abiding now, I don't know what abiding is. I am sitting here with you. Now, sometimes it's an hour of utter boredom. But sometimes when you're sitting there, that room would fill. And you would feel this presence. And you would get this, I am with you. It is okay. And just melt away the pain. And just set you on the course that's right. And had some amazing times like that. You don't do that without pain. Not that those people ever needed to be hurt, but you don't press in and really try to connect with God unless there's some reason that you have to do that. And I did that. But one story I wanted to tell on this, there are a couple times you get an experience which is just profound. It just is something that sort of shakes you to the core and like this changes like the way you view the world. And I was heading in there one day. So Jesus, I'm going to sit. So Jesus, I can relate to, you got the Trinity. You got Father God, you got Jesus, you got Holy Spirit. And Jesus I can relate to because his best buddies, Peter, James, and John, these guys with him day and night, 2.5 years, he sent them out to do miracles. They come back, he says, hey, go prepare a place for me in Samaria. They go to prepare a place and the Samaritans say, get out of here, you're going to Jerusalem, we don't want you. And they've just worked miracles, so they're feeling like, I've got it. Jesus, we're do you a favor. We're going to call down fire and cook this whole city. And Jesus is like, no, fellas, that's not what spirit we're of. That's his buddies. So if he can hang out with those guys, he can hang out with me, we're going to be all right. So I can hang out with Jesus and know he's going to accept me. But Father God is different. So I was heading in there one day to hang out with Jesus, and it was like, no, you need to pay attention to Father God today. So I don't know what that looks like because he's huge, right? The descriptions, he's got angels, he's got lightning and thunders and rainbows and angels. Like that's a little too much for me, but you got to shrink yourself down to man size today because I'm going to try this. I don't know what that looks like. So I went in there and I got to read this one to you because I go there, I sit down as I normally do and grab the hands, doing that thing with the nail hole, and I stopped. I said, that's ridiculous. You wouldn't have nail holes. And I get hit with this intense, it's like, you ever see The Matrix? It gets a download and just boom. I had to sit down and just unpack what just happened. And it went like this. You don't have nail holes, do you? Of course I do. Don't you know that I experienced everything that Jesus experienced, that I was in him receiving the same crucifixion? He said, in fact, there's nothing that you have experienced that I did not feel the same pain or joy that you experienced to the very same degree. You know how you hurt when your children hurt, but you only experience a shadow of their experience. My experience of you is exactly as you experience. It's not diminished. I have the capacity to do that. Remember how I said that if you've done something to even the least of these, that you've done it to me? That is true in the most practical sense. You are never in pain on your own, and you provide relief to my pain by meeting the needs of others. He goes on, and again, this is all, it goes on. Furthermore, my glory is best revealed in absorbing the wrongs of others. The wounds in Jesus' hands are a trophy of grace, and they demonstrate the evil that he simply absorbed and therefore no longer exists. Sin is swallowed up in glory. When you forgive others, you participate in that glory. You join me in absorbing evil and eliminating its power. That's where true glory is manifest. Anyhow, this thing went on in tears and whatever, but it shook me. You walk out of that, and I just went in to have this little time, and boom, and your whole view of the world suddenly shifts. And this whole absorbing the wrongs of others theme. So then, he tells you something, and then he's going to demonstrate it. So a number of months later, I'm sitting in church, and again, I'm like, I'm not going to play the Christian game. If you're not going to connect with me, I don't want out. I want you to meet with me in a tangible way, all right? And so I'm sitting there in church having this conversation with God, and he brings up somebody that I care a lot about, who'd caused a lot of wounds over the years. And he walked me through each of them, and it was a craziest experience because I don't have a heart that's this generous. And it went like this. As I walked through this experience, all this, it caused me pain, I began to feel a crazy amount of honor. It's like God's honoring me. And I kept repeating, thank you for giving me the privilege of absorbing these wrongs from this person so they will never be held against him. And it was like this honor. It was like, wow, that was cool that I could do that. I walked up, of course, it's emotions again. I cry. But it's, anyhow, the Lord shows up. When you stand up here like this, you think people are going to think I'm like Jesus, and ask my wife, I'm not. But we have these experiences where he jumps in and he gives you this boost of things you could not do on your own, ways of thinking you couldn't think on your own, ways of acting that you couldn't act on your own. So God gives a supernatural boost, and I believe this applies to the practice of medicine as well. If he wants us to meet the needs of people, and we invite him to do it with us, don't you think he'd give us a better way of doing it? Shouldn't we be the ones of the innovators in the field of medicine? Shouldn't we be delivering ways that are more effective from people? We should be the ones coming up with medical breakthroughs. So I was sharing these stories with one of my students, and they asked me a question. Have you ever felt strongly that God told you something and it didn't come to pass? And I was like, yeah. I have had, probably over the past 13 years, this kind of talking to me that happens over and over again. And it started about 2012, and then picked up again in 2020, and then it's been more than annually since then, almost like crescendoing. And it goes a little something like this. It was like the idea of building a Christian medical center. But he didn't call it a medical center in these experiences. He calls it an embassy. What's an embassy? A place where the government of one nation can sit in another. And they just keep happening. What does this mean? And so it would be a place to practice medicine the way he designed it to be practiced and provide healing for people, spirit, soul, and body. In addition, he'd give me this other picture. He said, I want you to show young people how you do this. How do you relate to me in the care of patients? How do you care for them? How do you pray to me? How do you receive the answers for them? Bring them in and show them your life. And then I had folks move in with me shortly after that who became part of the team. But, that's kind of a vulnerable place to be, but it brings a lot of fun. It brings a lot of joy. So anyhow, based on this and how this has been contributing, here we are, 13 years after this first experience, and we are packing it up, leaving Harvard, coming to West Palm Beach, and seeing what God's got next for us here. And this is kind of the first practical step. She's crying. This is kind of the first practical step in that. So again, we can't ever do this on our own, and I have a lot of cool new friends that have just come together for this meeting, and I'm excited to get to know them better and to partner with them in this adventure. So I'm going to end with that, guys. Thank you.